the cultural landscape of the United States has been defined by intense political division, a pressure cooker of ideologies where certain government entities become lightning rods for public fury. Among these, Immigration and Customs Enforcement, or ICE, has frequently found itself at the absolute center of the storm, sparking fierce national debates and, inevitably, waves of targeted violence across the country. Government buildings and federal agents became targets for those pushed to the brink by radical convictions. Yet, of all the incidents that erupted during this volatile era, none would prove more deeply baffling, intensely debated, or shrouded in disturbing irony than the events that unfolded in Texas. It began with a silent figure stepping into the shadows of the early morning, armed with a rifle and a deeply fractured mind, ready to execute a plan that would leave a trail of unanswered questions. Joshua Yan's journey toward that fateful morning began in the seemingly quiet suburb of Allen, Texas, where he was born in April of 1996, growing up in a standard suburban household. Alongside his parents and older brother, Joshua initially appeared to be just another ordinary kid navigating the halls of Anderson Elementary School. It was here that he formed a volatile yet enduring friendship with a classmate named Anthony, a bond that ironically sparked from violent friction, defined by schoolyard brawls, cafeteria altercations, and even a moment where Joshua hurled a kickball directly at Anthony's head. The constant fighting eventually forced their parents to intervene. But the bitter rivalry took an unexpected turn when both boys received Nintendo GameCubes for Christmas. Discovering they lived close to one another, they bonded over intense sessions of Super Smash Bros. Melee, transitioning from bitter enemies into inseparable gaming companions who spent their afternoons immersed in digital worlds. As the years progressed into their early teens, the duo spent an increasing amount of time huddled around Joshua's desktop computer, where Joshua's fascination with technology began to take a much darker turn. By the 6th grade, during a standard independent study project, Joshua presented a proposal that immediately horrified his educators. He wanted to meticulously map out the interior layout of their school to design a customized map for a first-person shooter game. The administration shut the project down with a definitive and echoing no, alarmed by the unsettling nature of the request. While there was no concrete evidence at the time suggesting Joshua harbored genuine intentions of becoming a school shooter, the incident marked a distinct, ominous shift in his behavioral trajectory. He was beginning to consciously push societal boundaries, transforming from a quirky neighborhood kid into an edgy, unpredictable individual who craved the thrill of the forbidden. By the time Joshua transitioned into Allen High School, his reputation as a harmless class clown and daredevil had evolved into something far more criminal. His friend group watched with growing unease as he branched out into petty theft, regularly shoplifting candy bars from local convenience stores before graduating to grander acts of defiance, such as spray painting elaborate graffiti across the back walls of a local Walmart. Around this time, Joshua formed a new friendship with a boy named Mitchell Ryan, who would soon become deeply alarmed by the contents of Joshua's digital life. While casually browsing through the file directory of Joshua's iPod, Mitchell stumbled upon a hidden cache of highly disturbing, explicit imagery involving young children. Though Joshua was only 15 himself at the time, meaning the media could have potentially featured individuals close to his own age, the sheer horror and revulsion expressed by his peers strongly indicated that the children in the photos were visibly and unacceptably younger. This dark curiosity was accompanied by an escalating plunge into substance abuse, as Joshua began experimenting heavily with hallucinogens, frequently boasting to his friends about his intense experiences with salvia and LSD. Marijuana, however, became his primary obsession, an everyday fixture of his routine that he aggressively pressured his inner circle to adopt. But drugs were only a fragment of his retreat into the fringes of the internet. Joshua had also developed a profound, desensitized passion for gore and shock websites. Anthony recalled a terrifying afternoon when Joshua called him over to his computer screen to watch a notorious, viral video depicting 2 Ukrainian serial killers brutally murdering a man with a hammer and a screwdriver. While Anthony felt physically ill and forced himself to look away from the screen, he glanced over at Joshua, who was staring intently at the horrific violence without blinking or wincing. When the video finally ended, Joshua merely offered a chilling, deadpan utterance, "Yeah, that was pretty bad," leaving Anthony with the haunting realization that his friend had already witnessed far worse. The digital Wild West of anonymous online platforms became Joshua's true sanctuary, a space where he could shed all societal expectations and indulge his darkest impulses without consequence. He became a hyperactive user on anonymous image boards like 4chan and various subreddits, fascinated by the concept that a person could log on and openly discuss what he called the ugly truth without facing real-world repercussions. Operating on Reddit under the pseudonym Hanky Bob, Joshua utilized his anonymity almost exclusively to document his heavy drug use and share deeply embarrassing personal habits. In one candid post, he openly admitted that his daily routine consisted of little more than getting high alone and locked in his room, writing, "Lol, I get too carried away. Fapping is a priority, and sometimes that happens like 3 times a day." To anyone analyzing his digital footprint during his high school years, he appeared to be nothing more than an isolated, substance-dependent slacker. Interestingly, during this formative period, Joshua displayed absolutely zero interest in the political landscape that was beginning to fracture the nation around him. His high school friends explicitly remembered him as the least political person in their entire social circle. A guy who genuinely loathed ideological debates and would aggressively shut them down. Whenever peers would begin arguing about government policies or current events, Joshua would be the first to cut them off, demanding they shut up so they could just focus on playing Halo. However, those closest to him did note that beneath his apathy lay a deeply rooted, intense anti-authoritarian mindset that rejected any form of control or established structure. Despite these glaring behavioral red flags, Joshua still managed to maintain a remarkably positive outlook on his personal future, expressing a desire to find a meaningful romantic relationship, leverage his vast computer knowledge into a legitimate career, and express himself through music and art. The fragile illusion of a promising future completely shattered the moment high school came to an end, signaled by an omen of the chaos that was to come. Joshua attended his formal graduation ceremony at the massive American Airlines Center in downtown Dallas, walking across the stage to receive his diploma, while completely zoned out of his mind on a heavy dose of LSD. Following the ceremony, his family relocated to the nearby city of Fairview, where Joshua attempted to transition into higher education by enrolling at Collin College. Though his attendance was sporadic and plagued by constant withdrawals, he later attempted to salvage his academic aspirations by pursuing a degree in mechanical engineering at the University of Texas at Dallas. But he utterly failed nearly all of his classes and dropped out in disgrace. His attempts to enter the workforce were equally disastrous, resulting in brief, failed stints at Target and Domino's, and even a disastrous attempt at stand-up comedy that fell flat because, as Mitchell noted, Joshua simply wasn't as funny as he believed he was. By 2015, Joshua's downward spiral officially caught the attention of law enforcement. When he was arrested in Collin County for marijuana possession, the legal trouble escalated dramatically the following year when the state upgraded the charges to delivery of marijuana, a felony offense due to the quantity involved. Facing serious prison time, Joshua entered a guilty plea, receiving a sentence of 5 years of probation, alongside hundreds of dollars in fines and restitution. Surprisingly, he managed to adhere strictly to the terms of his supervision, demonstrating enough compliance to earn an early release from probation. After just 1 year, desperate to escape the shadow of his failures and legal stains in Texas, Joshua spotted an online advertisement in late 2017 that promised a fresh start. A call for seasonal laborers to harvest crops at an indoor marijuana cultivation facility in Benton County, Washington. Without hesitation, Joshua packed his meager belongings into his vehicle and embarked on a cross-country drive to the Pacific Northwest, hoping the legal cannabis industry would provide the purpose he so desperately lacked. Unfortunately, the reality of his new life was grim. Joshua never secured housing and spent the entirety of his time in Washington living directly out of his car. The owner of the cultivation facility, Mr. Sanderson, immediately recognized that the young man from Texas was profoundly eccentric and socially driving halfway across the continent for temporary minimum wage work. When the harvest season concluded and the rest of the temporary staff was laid off, Mr. Sanderson allowed Joshua to stay on for a little while longer, out of pure sympathy, recognizing that the young man was completely lost in life. But compassion could only go so far. Joshua proved to be an incredibly erratic, unreliable, and inefficient worker, ultimately forcing management to terminate his employment. Defeated and broke after months of surviving in his vehicle, Joshua was forced to return to Texas, moving back into his parents' home as a completely broken man. He had severed nearly all communication with his childhood friends, only reaching out to Anthony on rare occasions to lament his string of failures, including a solar panel installation job in 2018 that didn't even survive 2 months. Following that termination, Joshua withdrew from the traditional workforce permanently, retreating into an isolated existence where his parents were the only human beings he interacted with. His mother and father watched in horror as a drastic, terrifying shift consumed their son's personality upon his return from Washington. Joshua became utterly convinced that he was suffering from a severe case of chronic radiation sickness, and he developed a crippling obsession that he was profoundly allergic to plastic, refusing to touch any household items without wearing thick cotton gloves. As Joshua sank deeper into his unmedicated delusions, the world outside his bedroom window was rapidly fracturing along political lines, with Texas becoming a primary battleground for civil unrest. By 2025, radicalized individuals across the state began launching localized attacks against immigration and customs enforcement facilities, bringing the federal agency into the crosshairs of domestic extremism. In July of that year, an aggressive crowd swarmed an ICE facility in Alvarado, vandalizing government property before an unidentified individual opened fire on arriving police officers from the tree line. Just days later, a young man launched a brazen assault on a Customs and Border Protection facility in McAllen, firing multiple rounds into the structure before law enforcement fatally intervened. This was followed by a bomb threat at a Dallas ICE facility by a man claiming to wield a detonator, creating an atmosphere of heightened paranoia and hypervigilance across federal sectors. Sequestered away with his desktop computer, Joshua watched these violent events unfold through the lens of the internet, silently absorbing the chaos without uttering a word to his family. Though he kept his thoughts entirely to himself, the anti-authoritarian currents of his youth had finally coalesced into a definitive, dangerous operational plan. Joshua decided he would launch his own assault on a federal facility, quietly utilizing his legal rights to purchase an 8mm bolt-action rifle. Despite acquiring the high-caliber weapon, Joshua never visited local shooting ranges to practice, a detail his older brother Noah later highlighted by noting that while Joshua understood the basic mechanics of a firearm, he was a notoriously terrible shot. To prepare for his mission, Joshua downloaded rudimentary agent tracking applications created by activist groups, using the crowdsourced data to analyze the daily movements of federal employees in his metropolitan area. In the closing weeks of August, Joshua's planning intensified as he downloaded official emergency management documents detailing the exact addresses of Homeland Security offices throughout Dallas County. He transformed his bedroom into a command center, scattering handwritten notes that outlined a chilling, calculated game plan to terrorize a specific ICE facility located along Interstate 35 East. In these frantic scribbles, Joshua branded federal agents as human traffickers, explicitly stating that his primary objective was to maximize lethality against these officers while inflicting severe property damage. He wrote that his assault would be conducted in what he deemed an ethical manner, emphasizing that he would take extreme care to minimize any potential injuries to detainees or innocent bystanders. The notes revealed a young man who harbored no illusions of survival, writing that he hoped his actions would inflict pure terror upon the agents, forcing them to constantly fear the presence of a rooftop sniper. As his self-appointed execution date drew near, Joshua took meticulous steps to erase his digital footprint, leaving a final snide note that simply read, "Good luck with the digital footprint," signaling his belief that he had successfully wiped his online history. His final hours were spent in a state of hyperfixation, repeatedly searching the internet for graphic videos and ballistics data regarding the recent high-profile assassination of political commentator Charlie Kirk. In the early morning hours of September 24, Joshua loaded his vehicle with his bolt-action rifle, a ladder, and custom ammunition, upon which he had scrawled the words "anti-ICE" in blue ink. He arrived at the target facility around 3 a.m., parking his vehicle nearby and adhering a bizarre, handmade sign to his passenger window that detailed the convoluted conspiracy regarding nuclear fallout passing over the United States. With the radioactive fallout sign securely fastened to his car, Joshua unloaded his heavy ladder, propping it against the side of an adjacent attorney's office that provided a direct, elevated vantage point overlooking the federal facility's parking lot. Clambering onto the roof with his bolt-action rifle, he lay in total silence for over 3 hours, watching the dark complex as the sun slowly began to rise. At approximately 6:30 a.m., the silence shattered when a commercial transport van pulled into the secured lot, immediately drawing Joshua's focus. He raised his rifle and unleashed a rapid succession of high-caliber rounds toward the vehicle, the bullets piercing the metal frame of the van and shattering the brickwork of the adjacent building. Inside the facility, frantic agents scrambled to secure civilians, shouting that an active sniper was raining bullets down on the compound from an unknown, elevated position. As the echoes of gunfire faded, federal agents advanced on the rooftop, only to discover that the shooter had turned the weapon on himself the moment his position was compromised. The FBI immediately flooded the scene, launching a massive domestic terrorism investigation and tracing the vehicle back to Joshua's parents' suburban home in Fairview. Later that afternoon, heavily armed agents swarmed the residence, carting out boxes of digital devices and uncovering the extensive collection of handwritten manifestos scattered across his bedroom. When investigators began cross-referencing the explicit directives found within Joshua's notes with the actual physical evidence documented at the crime scene, they uncovered a stunning, incomprehensible discrepancy. The handwritten manifestos unequivocally proved that Joshua had formulated a rigid, highly specific ideology, completely independent of any organized extremist groups, altering the entire trajectory of how intelligence agencies viewed the threat. The tension reached a fever pitch as the public demanded answers, and the media began dissecting the terrifying contents of the manifestos recovered from the bedroom. In his writings, Joshua had detailed a profound, burning hatred for the federal government, portraying himself as a lone wolf warrior operating entirely on his own accord with the statement, "Yes, it was just me and my brain." Online communities exploded with wild speculation, fueled by the mainstream media's sensationalized claims that the shooter had been spraying bullets, leading many to falsely believe an automatic weapon had been utilized. In reality, witness testimonies confirmed that Joshua had manually cycled his bolt-action rifle to fire between 6 and 10 rounds over a span of several tense minutes. Conspiracy theories began festering across the internet, with polarized factions arguing whether the dead shooter was a radical leftist archetype or a conservative operative executing a deep state false flag operation. Back on the digital servers of the gaming platform Steam, Joshua's former online acquaintances began mercilessly mocking his demise within private chat rooms, pointing out the dark absurdity of his final actions. Members of his gaming group joked about his terrible marksmanship, coldly stating that the shooter should have spent less time playing video games and significantly more time practicing at a real firing range. Meanwhile, the political sphere capitalized on the tragedy, with the governor of Texas issuing aggressive statements reaffirming absolute support for federal border enforcement, while federal directors shared graphic images of the custom anti-ice ammunition found on the roof. Yet, beneath the political grandstanding and the chaotic noise of online debates, a dark, suffocating mystery persisted regarding the precise sequence of events that took place inside that transport van during those terrifying morning hours. The absolute, devastating truth of what transpired on that rooftop was finally laid bare when the FBI completed its comprehensive ballistics reconstruction and medical examinations. Joshua's handwritten notes had explicitly documented a strict moral code, an absolute directive to spare the lives of the helpless and ensure that his high-caliber rounds only struck the federal agents he deemed human traffickers. But the brutal reality of his complete lack of firearms training and notoriously horrific aim culminated in a scenario of unimaginable tragedy. Joshua Yan did not hit a single immigration and customs enforcement agent during his entire assault. Instead, his wild, unpracticed shots pierced directly through the rear passenger compartment of the transport van. He had rained lethal gunfire directly onto the exact group of vulnerable people he had consciously sworn to protect in his manifesto. High-caliber rounds struck 3 foreign nationals trapped helplessly inside the vehicle, ensuring that Joshua's calculated crusade played out in the most horrific, ironic manner humanly possible. A 37-year-old Venezuelan immigrant named Norman Guzman Fuentes was killed instantly in the back seat, while two Mexican nationals, Miguel Angel Garcia Hernandez and Jose Andres Bordna Molina, were rushed to the hospital in critical condition before succumbing to their extensive internal injuries days later. Joshua had left his home that morning, fueled by a delusional, self-righteous crusade to terrorize a federal agency, completely detached from the reality of his own severe mental decline. In his frantic attempt to strike a blow against the system, he succeeded only in destroying the lives of three desperate men who were entirely at the mercy of that system, leaving their families to mourn a senseless slaughter born from pure delusion. The smoke has long since cleared from the concrete corridors of the Dallas facility, leaving behind only the cold, indelible scars of a completely broken mind. No political systems were altered, no grand statements achieved their mark, and no ideologies found validation in the quiet darkness of that Texas morning. There are no lessons to be gleaned from the ashes of a tragedy constructed entirely out of isolation and unmedicated shadows. Only the hollow silence remains. A quiet testament to the day a man looked into the mirror of his own delusions, pulled the trigger, and completely missed the point.